It's 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday. Sarah's standing in her kitchen, coffee in hand, staring at her banking app. The mortgage payment cleared. The car note cleared. But something doesn't feel right. She's doing everything right, maxing out the 401k match, packing lunches, skipping the vacations her parents took for granted, and yet, she feels like she's falling behind. She's not imagining it. The rules of the American economy have quietly rewritten themselves, and she's caught in the middle. Literally. You've probably heard economists talk about the K-shaped recovery. Top earners rocketing up, lower earners sliding down. Two Americas diverging. But Bank of America just released data that changes everything. Forget the K. We're living in an E-shaped economy now. 3 tiers, 3 completely different realities. The top is thriving, the bottom is surviving on credit, but the middle? The middle is spending nervously, caught between 2 worlds belonging fully to neither. Today we're mapping exactly where you might fall in this new economic structure and what it means for every financial decision you make going forward. To understand where we are, we need to understand how we got here. Back in 2020, economists started noticing something unusual about the pandemic recovery. It wasn't a V-shaped bounce. It wasn't a U or an L. It was a K2 lines splitting apart, heading in opposite directions. Higher earners, especially those who could work remotely, kept earning, kept saving, watched their home values climb. Their line went up. Lower earners, service workers, hospitality staff, retail employees faced layoffs, reduced hours, industries that simply disappeared. Their line went down. For years, economists assumed this was temporary, a post-pandemic hangover that would eventually resolve. The lines would converge again. They haven't. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, put it bluntly, this is not a cyclical or temporary phenomena. It's a structural, fundamental issue. And now, Bank of America's latest research shows something even more troubling. That K is evolving. There's a third line emerging, the middle, and it's doing something different. In January 2026, higher-income consumer spending on credit and debit cards grew 2.5%. Lower-income households, just 0.3%. But the middle, a flat 1%. That might sound like middle-income stability. It's not. Bank of America describes it as nervous spending, not confident growth, not credit-dependent survival, but anxious caution. Here's what Bank of America's analysts are observing. Middle-class households may be getting by for now, but they're experiencing stress in waves. Not only are they facing high prices, but every couple of months something else surges. Insurance premiums spike, then grocery prices, then childcare costs, then car repairs. It's not one blow, it's death by 1,000 cuts. The numbers paint a stark picture of economic divergence. The top 20% of earners now account for nearly 60% of all U.S. consumer spending. 60%, from 1/5 of the population. Meanwhile, the net worth of America's top 1% hit a record share, nearly 32% of total U.S. wealth in Q3 of 2025. The bottom 50%? They hold just 2.5%, combined. The Gini coefficient, that's the measure economists use to track wealth concentration, now sits at 60-year highs. We haven't seen inequality like this since before the civil rights movement. But here's what makes the E-shaped economy different from the K. In a K-shape, you had 2 groups, winners and losers. The E adds a third category, the anxious in between. These are households earning between roughly $50,000 and $150,000. Not poor by any measure, but not wealthy either. They own homes, but feel one bad month away from trouble. The middle class itself has been shrinking for decades. Pew Research found that the share of Americans considered middle class dropped from 61% in 1971 to just 51% by 2023. That's a 10-point drop in middle-class America over 50 years. Not because people climbed up, though some did, but because more fell through the floor. So what does this mean for you? That depends entirely on which tier you're currently in and which direction you're moving. Let's start with the top tier. If you're a higher earner, household income above roughly $150,000, the data shows your spending is actually accelerating. You're confident. Your investment accounts have recovered. Your home equity has grown. Your job security feels solid. You're not just maintaining your lifestyle, you're expanding it. If that's you, the conventional wisdom might actually apply. You could consider continuing to invest for the long term. Diversify. Think about estate planning. The system is working in your favor. But here's an important caveat, and this is something I want to emphasize throughout today's episode. Everyone's situation is different. Your risk tolerance, your timeline, your specific circumstances all change the math. Now let's look at the bottom tier. Lower income households, those earning under about $50,000, are showing the most concerning patterns in the data. TransUnion data shows that 59% of cardholders earning between $25,000 and $49,999 have carried a credit card balance at least once in the last year. That's not using credit strategically, that's depending on it. If you're in this tier, the standard financial advice often doesn't apply. Build a 6-month emergency fund sounds reasonable until you realize there's nothing left to fund it with. For lower-income households, the priority sequence often needs to flip. Consider focusing first on breaking the credit dependency cycle, even small steps. A $500 emergency fund can prevent a $2,000 debt spiral. But today, I want to spend most of our time on the tier that doesn't get enough attention, the one that defines this new E-shaped economy. The anxious middle. These are the people who don't qualify for safety net programs but can't access the wealth-building tools available to higher earners. Too rich for assistance. Too stretched for opportunity. Financial stress is increasingly affecting middle-income consumers ages 45 to 60. These are people who can no longer borrow to fund their lifestyle. Credit markets have tightened and they've hit their limits. Here's the trap. For decades, middle-class families used home equity lines and credit cards to smooth over income volatility. Car broke down? Put it on the card. Roof needs repair. HELOC. That worked when interest rates were low and home values kept rising. But rates are higher now. Home equity gains have slowed, and those credit limits, many households have already hit them. So what happens to the middle class when the emergency fund is empty and the credit card is maxed? They don't collapse. Not immediately. They freeze. Bank of America's data shows this clearly. Middle-income spending grew just 1%, while upper income grew 2.5%. That gap might seem small, but compounded over months and years, it represents fundamentally different economic realities. So if you're in that anxious middle, here's a framework that might help. And again, please consider your own circumstances and consult with a qualified advisor. This isn't financial advice, just a thinking tool. First, identify which tier you're actually in. Don't go by income alone, look at your behavior. Are you spending confidently, nervously, or are you relying on credit to cover basic expenses? Second, you might want to build what I call a surge reserve. Not a full emergency fund, just enough cash to handle those wave pattern price shocks Bank of America identified. Insurance premiums jump? Covered. Car needs brakes? Handled. Third, and this might be the most important one, consider reviewing your debt-to-income ratio quarterly instead of annually. In an E-shaped economy, conditions shift faster. Last quarter's comfort zone might be this quarter's danger zone. Fourth, take a hard look at lifestyle inflation. Discretionary spending that felt comfortable 2 years ago may not be sustainable now. That's not failure, that's reality. The rules changed. Finally, think about career trajectory. In a stratified economy, upskilling investments might have higher returns than they would in a more mobile market. The difference between tiers isn't just income, it's stability. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying everyone in the middle tier needs to upend their life. Sometimes staying put is the right call. Sometimes aggressive change makes things worse. What I am saying is that the old playbook, work hard, spend responsibly, trust the system, needs updating. The system itself has changed shape. Your strategy might need to change too. And look, I know this isn't easy to hear. If you're in that anxious middle, you're already working hard. You're already making sacrifices. And I'm telling you, the ground beneath you has shifted. But here's the thing. Awareness is the first step. Understanding where you fall in this new structure lets you plan accordingly. You can't navigate a map you don't have. If this kind of breakdown helps you think about your own finances, hit that subscribe button. We cover these structural shifts every week. Because the economy keeps evolving, and so should your playbook. Let me bring this back to Sarah, the woman we met at the top of the episode. She's looking at her banking app and something doesn't feel right. She's not imagining the squeeze. The data confirms it. Bank of America's research shows that households like hers are experiencing real economic pressure, not the dramatic crisis of lower earners, not the expanding prosperity of higher earners, but something in between. The anxious in between. That's not a character flaw. It's a structural position in a system that's quietly stratified into 3 tiers. So here's the bottom line. The E-shaped economy isn't a prediction, it's a description of where we already are. 3 tiers, 3 different realities, 3 different sets of appropriate financial strategies. If you're at the top, conventional wisdom still applies. If you're at the bottom, focus on breaking the credit cycle. And if you're in the middle, know that your anxiety is valid and now you can plan for it. I'll leave you with this: the shape of the economy changed. Your shape doesn't have to match it, but your strategy should acknowledge it exists. Until next time, stay informed, stay adaptive, and as always, make those money moves. Remember, this content is for informational purposes only and is not financial advice.